Hello and welcome to another IELTS writing video. Today we're looking at what differentiates band 6, 7, and 8. If you find this video helpful, I encourage you to visit my blog at IELTS.com, my IELTS related chat website at IELTS-chat.com, and my website for the online ESL community at eslmeet.com. I expect that today's lesson will be quite long, and I think that we will go over a number of tips that you will find helpful, so it might be useful for you to grab a pen and a paper and to take notes as we go through today's lesson. So basically in this video I wanted to clearly outline exactly what distinguishes band 6, 7, and 8 writing. So in this video we're going to use two PDF documents that you can download directly from IELTS.org. The first is the IELTS Task 2 Band Descriptors chart, which is the public version of the chart. And you've probably seen it in the other videos that I've made. It looks like this. It basically goes over the 4 criteria that you are expected to exhibit in your writing, and it outlines the skills needed for each band. The second PDF that we're going to use today is the IELTS Writing Sample Script PDF that is also available from IELTS.org. And in this PDF, we are provided a number of example responses, and we're also provided with the band that they would receive on the exam. And I think that this file is very helpful to refer to, as it shows you exactly, with comments, what band these various writing examples would achieve. So we will analyze a few of these writings later in this lesson as well. So you may want to get those two files before continuing this video. So as you know, your IELTS examiner is going to be marking your writing based on 4 criteria. So the first is task achievement. The second is coherence and cohesion. The third is the lexical resources that you use to deliver your response, and the fourth is grammatical accuracy. And in this video I would like to go through each criterion and illustrate what you need to do to raise your score from a 6 to a 7 or from a 7 to an 8. So if we start with task achievement, now if you look at your band descriptors chart, you will notice a couple of things that the chart makes clear. So firstly, one of those things is that 6, 7, and 8 band scores all fully address all parts of the task. So fully address all parts of the task. Now this is one thing that is common between the three different bands. So if you're wondering, well, what distinguishes writing between a band 5 and a band 6, one of the key things in the task achievement portion of the mark is that a band 6 or above will fully address all of the of what is being asked of the student in the question. So if you were to look at a student that received a 5 on their examination, typically they had not performed in a manner that fulfilled what their question was asking. So this is one thing that's common between 6, 7, and 8. This is the level that distinguishes responses that completely address the parts of the question. Okay, now let's go over some things that are different between a band 6, a band 7, and a band 8. So to begin, a band 6 presents evidence, but conclusions may be unclear. So by evidence, we're talking about examples that sort of support or help to prove a point. So a student writing at a band 6, they may provide some sort of example, but the problem is that the examiner might not be completely clear on what the relevance is of the example. Okay? So the student might have shared an example, but it's not completely clear perhaps what that example shows. So what is the conclusion that can be drawn from this example? Now in a band 7, examples are also presented. So 7 presents evidence and comes to conclusions, but evidence may lack focus. And that's the key thing here that would distinguish this from a higher band, like a band 8. So a band 7 student would be providing an example, and perhaps the conclusion would be clear. So there is a relevant link between these two things. But the problem is that perhaps the evidence is not particularly focused. And so what does focused mean? Well, this is referring to the ability of the person reading the essay to see how the example links to real life. So a student that gives an example that is very general or very broad, this would be a student that is providing an example that lacks focus. And this is exactly why I always encourage students, when you write your essay, use an example from real life. Share the name of a person, or share the name Bill Gates, share the name Michael Jackson, share the name Barack Obama, share a real tangible thing or person. Share the name of a company, share the name of a country, share something that people can relate to. Don't just say many countries. That's not a good example. Many countries is not specific. This lacks focus. Don't just say famous people or another broad category for something. Be specific. If you're specific, then your evidence will be much more focused. And focused evidence is at the basis of a strong argument. So overall, if you're able to do this, this will help to strengthen the the point that you're trying to make. So be specific. Okay, now what is different between Band 7 and Band 8 in the area of task achievement? So Band 8 writers present well-developed response with relevant supporting ideas. So if you're looking at your band descriptors chart, you will notice this, that band 8 is defined by being able to provide a well-developed response and being able to provide relevant supporting ideas. And these ideas, like we said before, would be focused. So if you're thinking, what's the difference between the student that gets a band 8 in the task achievement part of their mark and a student that gets a band 7, these are students that know that they're going to share a very specific example and they're going to show exactly how that example proves a point. So now let me clarify everything a little bit further by providing you with example of 6, 7, and 8 writing. So if a 6th student were writing their example, they might write something like this. For instance, the number of cars being used today causes pollution problems. Okay, so now here we have an example, and this example, of course, this would appear in the supporting sentence, in the supporting paragraph of our essay, and this would be an example that we're using to prove another point. Now what you can see in the example is that it's quite general. We're talking about, we're talking about cars, we're talking about pollution problems. We're not really referring to any specific area at all. So this is quite a general example that we're sharing. It's not particularly specific. Now at a band 7, the student might have written something like this. For instance, there are too many cars on the roads in big cities, and this causes pollution problems. Okay, so now we can see a little bit more where the student is going with this example. And we can see that it's starting to become a little bit more focused. We're not just talking about cars everywhere, we're talking about the cars on roads in big cities. Now the problem is that this example is still not very specific. A much stronger example would be if we could actually share perhaps the name of a place that is already experiencing pollution problems as a result of cars. So do you see how that would strengthen the argument? If we actually shared the name of a city that is really having problems with pollution at the moment, well, it's very difficult to counter-argue this because we're illustrating how this is already, a problem that is growing at the moment, or that it exists at the moment. So it's not just something kind of general that we pulled out of the air. It's something a little bit more specific. So watch what would occur at an 8 level. Someone would probably write something like, for instance, big cities like Shanghai experience major pollution problems due to their high volume of traffic. Okay, now the example has become very specific, and we have said, look at Shanghai. Shanghai has a problem. And of course, this is not the whole paragraph. This is just one sentence in the paragraph. And in the sentences that would come after it, we would explain a little bit more about how this links to our argument. But it's very difficult to counter-argue an example that is true to life, because this, this is not just, like I said, not something that we just pulled out of the air. This is a real thing that is happening. Okay. Now, so that's what I have to say about task achievement. And to me, when I look at the IELTS band descriptors chart, those are the points that stick out. So, if you're looking at a band 6, you're looking at a band 7, you're looking at a band 8, the manner in which the students respond to their task differ. Okay, now let's go to the next point, which is coherence and cohesion. And let's define what is different between between a band 6, a band 7, and a band 8. I'll just get this cleaned up a bit here. Okay. So you should know that coherence refers to the ability of a piece of writing to be understood. So is it clear? Cohesion refers to the ability of the various devices, which could be sentences, or it could be paragraphs, or it even could be words, the various devices in the essay to link together properly. So, you know, in an essay, you're not just writing a big group of sentences. No, these sentences are working together, and they're working towards a common goal, which is either to prove a thesis or to discuss the opinions of others and then come to a reasoned conclusion. So now, what is something that's common between 6, 7, and 8 band writing in the coherence and cohesion portion of the mark? Well, 6, 7, and 8 band writing, all parts of the writing can be understood. Okay, so if you're wondering, well, I mean, what's the difference between a band 5 and a band 6? If you look at a band 5 writing, there will be parts in the essay that the reader will not understand. They don't know what the student is talking about. And if you refer to some of the essays that we looked at together in that contest that I held on my blog, you'll notice that the ones that scored in the 5 or below, there are parts of the essay that you just don't understand. You don't know what the writer is saying. So that's a very key difference between, you know, essays that score 5 and below and essays that score 6 and above, is that essays scoring 6 and above can be understood. Now that doesn't mean that the ease of understanding a band 6 and a band 8 are the same. Of course not. Of course, you know, when you're reading a band 6, you might have to think a little bit more to understand what they're trying to say, but the bottom line is that you can as a native English speaker understand what it is that they are writing. So 6, 7, and 8 band for coherence and cohesion can be understood in all parts of the essay. Okay, now let's go over what is different between the various bands. So at a 6 level, cohesive phrases may be faulty or repetitive. So what this means is that the linking phrases that the student uses to tie their sentences together may not be used very accurately. So what I'm talking about are the phrases like because of this, as a result, on the other hand. Another point may be, for example, firstly, secondly. All of these sorts of phrases, if there's some error in the way that the student is using them, or they use the same phrase over and over, this would be characteristic of a band 6 student. Now, if we look at a band 7 student, a band 7 student would use cohesive devices appropriately in most areas. And as you'll see on the descriptors chart, it's they say that there may be some underuse or there may be some overuse of descriptors. So that's the first thing that distinguishes a band 7. So their ability to use cohesive devices is pretty good. So at some points they might overuse certain phrases or even slightly repeat them, but not to the level that the 6th student would. We will actually look at an example essay in a few minutes, and I think you will see that there is a bit of repetition at the 7 level. That's okay, but it can't be excessive. So that's the first thing that distinguishes 7 from 6. Now, a second thing is that a 7 student will know to structure their essay so that each paragraph has a central role and topic. So I think topic you would probably understand is that when we're writing our supporting paragraph, one of our supporting paragraphs, we should just be talking about one topic. We shouldn't be talking about 2 or 3 separate topics and trying to discuss them all at the same time. No, there should be one paragraph for each topic that we bring up. Now, what is meant by the word role? So role refers to the ability of a paragraph to carry out a job. So for example, when you write your essay, you're not going to start your essay with an example, or you're not going to start your essay with a conclusion. Each paragraph has a certain job that it has to carry out. So you have an introduction paragraph, then you have supporting paragraphs. And if you're writing a discussion essay, you might be providing an alternative point of view in one paragraph. Then your last paragraph, you're providing a conclusion. So the 7-level student will know to break apart these various jobs into different paragraphs. Okay, so when you look at, for example, a 5 or a 6, there might be certain parts of their writing that are either broken up into too many paragraphs, or they are grouped together into a paragraph that tries to do more than one role, which is incorrect. So we're going to see an essay in a minute that scores a 6 on the a 6 band on the exam, and the introduction is split into 2 paragraphs. And so of course this is a mistake. I mean, we don't need 2 paragraphs to introduce our essay. No, we just need 1. Okay, so that's another thing that distinguishes 7 from a 6. Now, band 8. So all cohesion is used appropriately. There are no mistakes. And paragraph structure is sound. And maybe if sound's a new word for you, just means it is without any problems. Okay, very similar to band 7, except that the level of cohesion is higher. And also, I'll just point out that the coherence, the ability of the reader to understand, is much. It's much easier for the reader to understand what the student is writing. So a native English speaker, when they read a student at an 8 level, there is very little work that they have to do to understand what the student is trying to say. And that's different than at the 6th level, where the reader might have to think and might have to, in their mind, reword what the student has written to understand. Okay, now that's all that I have to say about coherence and cohesion. Now let's carry on to lexical resources. And let me break this up. Okay, lexical resources. So lexical resources refers to the words, phrases, and wordings that the student uses on their exam. So what's common between 6, 7, and 8? Well, let's start with that. So 6, 7, and 8 writing all use contextual contextual vocabulary. Okay, now what does contextual mean? Contextual refers to words that are relevant for the topic. So for example, if your essay question is talking about technology, you should employ a number of words that are technology specific. So students, that place at a 5 or below are typically students that do not know enough vocabulary to be able to use words that are relevant for a particular topic. So students at 6, 7, and 8, the difference with these students is that they are more aware of certain contextual vocabularies and can use them. Now, of course, there is a difference in the ability of these students to use these contextual vocabularies at the 6, 7, and 8 level. So we'll just stick in here. The difference is with accuracy and spelling. Okay, so of course, the student that is writing at an 8 level is going to have much higher accuracy with the word and word types that they choose to use on the exam than a student at the band 6. So what I mean by word types is often in certain circumstances we can use perhaps a noun, but in other instances we might want to change that noun to a verb, or change it to an adjective, or change it to whatever word form we need, or to add a prefix when it's appropriate. So students at the 7 and 8 level will do this much more accurately than a student at the 6 level. Now students at the 7 and 8 level will also make use of, so 7 and 8 will make use of less common words. And if you're looking at your IELTS band descriptors chart, you will see this as well. So they make use of less common words and use more complicated word forms. So for example, these students would be fairly fluent in how to use certain prefixes with certain words. So if we were going to say something is not legitimate, the student would probably just skip that and call it illegitimate. Or if the student was talking about something that is not impressive or whatever, they would know enough just to call it, it's an unimpressive event or whatever the topic is that they're talking about. Okay, so these are students that are more fluent and able to change the forms of words than at the 6th level. Now, this is why I always suggest that students study how to convert words from one form to another. So, just give you a quick example. So, a word like illustrate. Illustrate. So, illustrate is a verb. Now, if we wanted to say that, such and such a point illustrates. Okay, so let's just say that. So this point illustrates, and then whatever. Now, in some circumstances, it might actually be. It might sound nicer for us to change the wording a little bit. So we might say something like the illustration this point makes, is relevant because, and then we go on like that. Or we could change something else as well. I mean, what is illustrated in this point is, and then whatever, So anyways, these kinds of students would be quite fluent and able to kind of change words and wordings as they need. They're not kind of stuck to a regimented pattern. Okay, that's what I have to say about lexical resources. Now let's go on to the final topic, which is grammatical accuracy. So the first thing that probably pops out at you when you look at your IELTS band descriptors chart and you look at the grammatical accuracy column is the phrase complex sentence and complex sentence structure. Often I think students make one of two mistakes when they look at this phrase and they try to interpret it. A lot of students think that when the IELTS band descriptors chart says complex sentence structures, that it is referring to the traditional definition of a complex sentence. So basically, they think that this means you are supposed to use an independent clause with a dependent clause, and that this will, magically increase your grammatical accuracy mark. That's incorrect. The second assumption that a lot of students make is that complex sentence structure simply means a long sentence. I'll just type it out in case you can't understand my pronunciation. Long sentence. And that is also incorrect. The complex sentence structure does not just mean you have to be writing in long sentences to score well. So if you look at the band 6, so let me just quote for us directly what it says under band 6. It says the student uses a mix of simple and complex structures. That's what the band 6 says. The band 7 says the student uses a variety of complex structures. Okay, so now again, what does this mean? This does not mean, they're not talking about a simple sentence versus a complex sentence, and they're not just talking about a long sentence. They're talking about the ability of the students to logically link ideas together with grammatical accuracy. So this doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be writing a very long sentence, but it does mean that your idea has to be able to be understood by the reader and in a manner that presents no grammatical errors. So let me give you a quick definition of what this portion of the IELTS band descriptors chart means. So this is it's talking about the ability of the student to logically link ideas together with grammatical accuracy. Now, this does not have to be done with very long, elaborate sentences. Often when I teach students in the classroom, I tell them that you are best in your examination to try and write in a concise manner. So what does concise mean? Concise means to be very specific, be very to the point, and not to use extremely long wordings to deliver what it is you want to say. So in a nutshell, concise just means short and specific. Now, I tell students to write concisely for two reasons. The first reason is that writing concisely is considered stylistically attractive. Okay, so if you write your sentences short and to the point, in English this is considered a good thing. Now, I remember when I was in Dubai, I had students that told me when you write Arabic, you are expected to write long and elaborate poetic phrases to deliver your point, and that this is considered stylistically attractive. But in English, it's different. If you're more to the point and you can say a lot without using, an excessive number of words, this is thought to be highly effective writing. So being concise is stylistically attractive in English. The second reason I recommend students write concisely is because it reduces the chance of grammatical error. Okay. So if you're writing a sentence that is, 20 words long, and you're doing this because you think it's going to increase your grammar mark, well, that's just ridiculous. It's not. What's going to happen is you're going to make a mistake, some grammatical mistake within those 20 words that could have been avoided had you written perhaps 2 sentences, or just shortened the sentence, as much as you can. Okay, so now writing concisely. Now let me share a bit of an example with you. Now let's say that we had these 2 sentences. So heavy pollution has led to the deterioration of people's health. These health problems put strain on a country's medical system. Okay? So 2 sentences, both grammatically accurate, both delivering a very concise point. Okay. Now, the chances of us making grammatical errors in these 2 sentences is much smaller than if we were to rewrite this as one sentence. So let me show you. So if we were to write this as one sentence, we would have to write, because heavy pollution has led to the deterioration of people's health, strain has been placed on the medical systems of many countries. Okay, so now when I combine the 2 sentences together, as you can see, the wording becomes extremely complicated, and the chances for us to make a mistake increase. So the question that I ask you is, which is better? Is it better to write 2 concise sentences that are grammatically free, or to attempt to write this longer sentence, which will most likely cause us to make a mistake on the examination? So of course the answer is to do the former. So just stick to those 2 sentences, or break your ideas down into smaller sentences, link them together with cohesive phrases, and you will fulfill your expectations for the grammar portion of your mark. Okay, so that's what I have to say about that. Now let's get back to our talk about the bands and how they differ. So what's different between grammar at band 6, grammar at band 7, and grammar at band 8? Well, let's start with band 7. Now if we talk about band 7, band 7 has many error-free sentences. Okay, so basically if you're writing at a band 7, many of the sentences that you're including, let's say about 50%, are without any grammatical error, which means that when your examiner reads through it, there is no pause, that they don't have to take pause and to comment on some small issue that you've included in your writing. Now this is different than at band 6, where perhaps you might have a couple of error-free sentences, but definitely not 50%. When you get to the band 8, this is a majority of error-free sentences. Okay, so What's the difference between a band 8 and a band 7 in the grammar section is that the majority of the sentences are error-free. Now, as we pointed out before, if you're writing, shorter, concise sentences, your chances of making errors is reduced, which means that your chances of scoring an 8 increase because you will have more sentences that are without error. Okay, now I want to share with you the most common grammatical errors that I see as an IELTS instructor. So the first error that I see all the time is with plurals. So students that write things like many of the person show signs of early cancer development. Okay, I see errors like this every single day. Silly, silly mistakes. Not many of the person, many people. And of course, this would be marked. If you were to write the sentence, many of the person, of course you will be marked with having one sentence with one grammatical error. Verb tenses are also, of course, an area where many mistakes are made. For example, President Obama has visited on the 3rd of March 2010. So we're talking about a specific point in the past, which means that we can't use present perfect. Obama visited on March 2010. Verb tenses, very common area for mistakes. Next, parallelism. So what does parallelism mean? Parallelism is using common grammatical structures at the same points in certain areas of a sentence. So let me share an example to illustrate. If I said, for example, Harvard University seeks students skilled with the abilities of critical thinking, self-discipline, and naturally smart. Okay, take a look at that sentence and see if you can figure out what the error would be. For example, Harvard University seeks students skilled with the abilities of critical thinking, self-discipline, and naturally smart. So, of course, we have a very small list here. The first and second things are nouns. The third thing is an adjective, and we can't have it like this. This smart would have to be changed into a noun of some kind. So we would say natural intelligence. Okay, parallelism. Another error I often see is to do with punctuation. And I'd say that the most common error for punctuation is either students using too many commas, or students writing sentences that are too long and not splitting their ideas up into smaller sentences. Those are the two most common punctuation errors that I see. Okay, now let's look at the second PDF I was telling you about at the beginning of the lesson, which is, let me double check the title here. Okay, it's entitled The Sample Candidate Writing Scripts and Examiners' Comments. Now I'll see if I can make this a little bit bigger so that you can see it clearly. Okay, let's just zoom in here a little bit. Okay, now this first essay that we're going to read together, and I'm not sure if you can see it clearly. You might just have to listen to me read it. So this is a student that scored a band 6. And before we read it, I would like you to watch for these errors that we talked about before earlier in today's lesson. So the first thing is that you will see that their introduction is not one paragraph, but it's been split into two separate paragraphs. The second thing is that there are many grammatical errors and awkward wordings, and these awkward wordings make it a little bit difficult for us to understand what the student is saying. The third thing is that some of the cohesive devices, which are the linking words between sentences, are not used properly. Those are the three things that pop out to me when I read this essay, and I believe they are the three main things why this student scores at a 6 level. So from the beginning it reads, the transport has been one of the most important problems for the last 2 centuries. Now you can already see this. I don't know why the student writes a capital T for 2. I don't know why they use the before transport, and why didn't they just use transportation? Anyway, let's continue. The problem began with the development and the growing of the cities. Again, we just talked about parallelism, didn't we? Now look here. This student has development, which is a noun, and the growing, which well, they should have the growth of the cities. Anyways, parallelism problem there. Before the 8th century, the people lived in small villages or towns, spelling mistake, and did not have necessity too far. The people did not worry about the time to arrive in somewhere. So as you can see, this first paragraph, or these first 2 paragraphs, are the introduction, and we're still a little bit unclear what the student is really trying to argue here. I think we understand what they mean, but we just don't know particularly what they are arguing. So that's obvious. That's an obvious indicator that this is a 6 student. Nowadays, the situation changed. Many cars on the streets and many people need to go to any place. The numbers of car has increased, and as a result, there are many problems. Pollution, noise, car accident, insufficient car park, and petroleum problems. So this paragraph is just full of grammatical errors, missing plurals. Yeah, I'm very surprised the student actually scored a 6. On the other hand, people use car to go anywhere, to work, to travel, to spent holiday, and to amusement. Meanwhile, the car is important. The cities must have another solution. It is important to organize its using and to meet alternative ways. Okay, so now do you remember at the beginning of today's lesson we talked about examples, and here we can see the student is being very general. They're talking about, people going to work, to travel, to spend holidays, to amusement. These are all kind of general examples, nothing too specific. In the big cities, there are some alternatives like undergrounds, coach, train, and bicycles. In China and Cuba, for example, there use a lot of bicycles for substituting the cars and coaches. Okay, again, we know what they're talking about, but many grammatical errors. It would be better to think about others, different kinds of transport. In Brazil, the government has talked about transport on the rivers. In this country, there are many rivers where it is possible to go to different places. In general, they are flat rivers. And again, we understand what the student is saying. The problem is we don't really know what they're trying to argue there. Another kind of transport is car that uses solar energy. So again, look at the lexical resources the student talks about here. We wouldn't say it like this. We would say there is a solar-powered car. So if you were a band 7 or a band 8, you would know enough to write solar-powered car, not car that uses solar energy. Probably they don't have pollution problems, and it is cheaper than other cars. More grammatical errors. In conclusion, the transport, why is there a capital T here? I have no idea. The transport is a social, I don't know what that says, in big cities, but its pollution depends on new technologies, other kinds of energy, and political aspects. So as you can imagine, the student scored a 6, and the examiner provides some comments. The comments are very similar to the comments that I have also noted. So if you want, you can download this file and read it for yourself. Now let's look at a Band 7 student very quickly. So, Band 7 student. Nuclear power is an alternative source of energy which is carefully being evaluated during these times of energy problems. During these years, we can say that we have energy problems, but in more or less 50 years, we will be facing an energy crisis. Okay, so already we can see the paragraph is much cleaner. It is to the point. Now, like we were saying before, we can already see a little bit of repetition in this student's writing. So I think they used the word during 2 times in 2 sentences. It's not a big problem, but it's something that you would not see at the 8 level. Nuclear power is an alternative source of energy, and unlike other sources such as solar energy, nuclear power is highly effective for industrial purposes. If it is handled correctly, there really is no danger for the public. It is cheap, there is no threat of pollution, and best of all, it is limitless. It is difficult to think about nuclear power as a good source of energy for people in general. This is due to the use it has been given since its birth during the Second World War. It is expressed as military power, and in fact, at the moment, nuclear power is limited to the few hands who consider themselves world powers. Okay, so again, we can sort of understand what the student is talking about. Repetition, it is. You know, again, we would not see this at the 8 level. When and if there is a change of ideology regarding the correct use of nuclear power, then we may all benefit from the advantages nuclear power can give us. If we outweigh the advantages and disadvantages of nuclear technology, we then have the following. As stated before, the advantages are that there is limitless supply, it is cheap, it is effective for industrial purposes, and still there are many benefits which have not yet been discovered. The disadvantages are at present time that it is limited to only a few countries who regard it as safe military power. Also, if mishandled, there is a risk for the population around the plant to undergo contamination, as we all know happened in Chernobyl. If these disadvantages can be overcome, then it is clear that nuclear energy can give us more benefits than problems. It will in the future be important as the energy crisis is not far ahead. Now, I think you can tell just by the way that I'm reading this that for me, this is I'm not having nearly as much stress as when we were reading the Band 6 response before. So, you know, this response is much easier to read, it's more straightforward, and the student has also provided us with some examples from real life to point out their point. In conclusion, nuclear power is good, it can be safe, and we will all benefit. It is up to our leaders to see that it is handled well so that we can all benefit from it. And so, you know, a little bit of repetition, a few spelling mistakes here and there, but overall the essay is much easier to read. Now, I have some points I want to share about this essay. The first is that the essay is somewhat clear. I'm not going to say somewhat, it's quite clear from the beginning to the end. You know, we know what the student is talking about at all parts of the essay. Point number 2 is that the paragraphing is effective. So you can see the student has organized all of their ideas by topic, and each topic has been put into its own paragraph. So earlier in today's lesson, we were saying that this is a distinguishing factor between a Band 7 student and a Band 6 student. Now, like we were saying, some bad things about this. There's a bit of repetition in there. The student also uses a lot of personal pronouns, like saying, you know, we all know what happened in Chernobyl, or, you know, for us it is good, or for we and we will all benefit. You know, just my advice to you is if you can, just try to avoid using this kind of language, and it'll help you sound a little bit more academic in your response. So just if you can write in a bit more, you know, write more passively, I think this would help you on your exam. But okay, now, so that's the end of our lesson for today. I hope that you've taken some helpful notes during this lesson, and I hope that this video helps to kind of clarify, you know, the differences between the bands 6, 7, and 8, which I often get asked, you know, in your emails. So I hope this video helps to clarify that. So I wish you good luck in your studies, and thank you very much for listening.